The Forbidden Love of Kamuga. In the heart of Kamuga, where customs were etched deeper than the creeks that cradled its fields, a truth was spoken with unquestioned certainty. Nyar Kamuga may not marry Jakamuga. It was the law, the lore, the lifeline of the village, meant to keep the bloodlines clean and the spirits at peace. But then came George and Helen. They were both children of privilege by Kamuga standards. George, the only son of a known cattle baron whose herds crested the hills like a moving mirage, and Helen, daughter of a proud widow whose gardens swelled with deck, cassava, and kale in seasons when fields elsewhere starved. They grew up neighbors, playmates, confidants, and one day their hearts refused to obey the law. Love had chosen, quietly and irrevocably. At 23, George knelt in the moonlit courtyard offering Helen a string of cowrie shells passed down from his grandmother. The news fell on Kamuga like a curse. "They are hexing our lineage," the villagers echoed in hushed circles outside granaries and in the market. The chief, known for his two-tongued judgments and pockets heavy with bribes, sanctioned a public hearing. George tried to argue, "We are not kin. Our fathers share not a drop of blood." Helen pleaded, her hands trembling on her swollen belly. "The child I carry, let her be born without shame." But Kamuga would not listen. As dusk painted the sky, the chief's voice cracked like a whip. "Leave Kamuga in 2 weeks. Return, and your shadow will be cursed." That night, George held Helen as she wept. Born under these stars in this soil, their lives had never reached beyond Kamuga's quiet hills. Helen was 3 months pregnant, her dresses already tightening at the waist. George, a trained mechanical engineer from a nearby polytechnic, had never set foot in Nairobi's sprawling chaos. Helen worked in Kamuga's district hospital, her hands capable, her spirit gentle, but her future now uncertain. They weighed their options. Nairobi? A place full of opportunity, but where rent ate dreams and food cost more than dignity? Kisumu? Just 38 kilometers away. Close, familiar, maybe promising. A small kiosk or garage, perhaps, but even that required money, connections, and a bit of luck, none of which they could be sure of anymore. The night before they left, it rained on Kamuga, heavy, like the sky wept with them. George walked to his father's cattle pen one last time, running his hand over the scarred horns of the oxen he'd known since boyhood. Helen stood by her mother's mango tree, the fallen fruit sweet and bruised, just like her heart. She had hoped her child would run in these fields, know these songs, be buried one day under the shade of the ancestors. But love, when it breaks the rules, always comes at a price. George and Helen left Kamuga with the dawn, stepping over the village boundary with hearts heavy but determined. They carried little more than hope, a few clothes, and the money Helen had secreted over months, just enough to survive for a week or two. They thought they'd reach Kisumu swiftly, find their bearings, and choose their path. But destiny had a different road carved out for them. Halfway to Kisumu, they reached Sondu, a trading center buzzing with movement, but quiet enough to feel like a pause between worlds. Stalls of maize, motorbikes idling with offers of transport, women frying fish by the roadside. The place felt alive yet unburdened. George suggested they stay a night, rest, and plan. Helen agreed. That single night turned into 2, then 3. Soon it was a month. They rented a tiny room behind a mechanic's shed, iron sheet walls, and a mattress on the floor. It was temporary, George said. Sondu had enough bustle that he could fix motorcycles, maybe even find an apprenticeship in a garage while they waited. Helen could help at a clinic or in a nearby chemist. Together they'd save enough for a future, whether in Kisumu or Nairobi. But then came the letter. A friend in Nairobi wrote back, offering George a place to stay, just a shared one room in Kibera, but close to the industrial area where George could try finding work. It was an opportunity, but money was tight. Their savings barely covered food, so they talked through the night. "I can go alone," George said. "I'll find work, send something small. You stay here. Sondu is close to Kamuga. If anything happens, if the baby comes early, you'll have someone to run to. My mother still loves you." Helen listened. Her fingers traced her growing stomach. She was nearly 5 months along, and their daughter kicked fiercely these days, as if she already knew the world was a battle. "Maybe you're right," Helen whispered. "I'll wait. Just come back." They both knew it would be hard. The night before George was to leave, Helen awoke with a fever, her body shaking, her sheets damp. George rushed her to the small clinic near the market. The nurse suspected a malaria strain, dangerous for a pregnant woman. She needed rest, hydration, medication, and George's plans were torn in half. George sat by her bedside that day, his bus ticket to Nairobi still tucked in his jacket. Helen's labored breathing filled the room. He held her hand. He never boarded the bus. 2 years had passed since George and Helen fled Kamuga. In Sondu, life moved at the pace of the river. Slow, steady, never forgetting where it came from. Igiolo, now a toddling spirit of joy and mischief, had become the center of their uncertain world. Her smile could lift the dust from George's shoulders after a long day fixing motorbikes, and Helen's voice, whenever she hummed lullabies to the child, carried echoes of all the songs Kamuga had silenced. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the messenger arrived. An old man named Olu, stooped, lean, and still watched over by Kamuga's ghosts, appeared at the doorway of the small house behind the mechanic's shop. He had traveled on foot, leaning on a walking stick fashioned from a guava tree. Only when he spoke Helen's name did she realize who he was. He had been the speaker at their banishment hearing. "George, Helen," he said, removing his cap. "I bring a message from home." They sat. Isiolo, sensing unease, clung to her mother's leg. Olu's eyes softened. "It is your father, George," he began. "Shakien. He is gone." The floor seemed to tilt. George stared at the ground. "He fell ill 2 moons ago and refused treatment. He wanted you to come." His last words were, "Tell my son, my only son, that a father forgives. Let the cattle graze freely with what's left of my honor." Olu paused. "He asked forgiveness for not protecting you." A broken silence followed. "And my mother?" Helen asked, voice trembling. "Is she well?" Olu nodded. "She is alive, but she is alone, surrounded by whispers. She has tried to send word, but the chief forbade it." His voice deepened. "People say the chief has lost face. Your father's death broke something in Kamuga. They say the curse was nonsense. The old ways are being questioned." George stood, unable to speak. Helen felt tears spill onto her daughter's hair. She had not cried for Kamuga in so long, but now the dam broke. "We can't go back," George finally said. "Kamuga." His voice faltered. "You can," Olu replied gently. "Kamuga needs you now. The chief's rule weakens. The granaries are empty, the cattle dying. People whisper that George Obuya's return could turn the wind. The same people who cursed you. Feel the weight now." Helen looked at him, eyes full of conflict. "But the curse." "Curse?" Olu scoffed. "The only curse here is pride. Come home, at least to bury your father." That night, George sat alone under the eaves, listening to the distant hum of Sondu. He thought of the father who held back affection but built him everything else. Of the chief who turned his own people into fearful keepers of tradition. Of the roads they had walked to get here, and whether it was time to walk another. Helen joined him, their daughter asleep in her arms. "Should we go back?" she whispered. George looked at the dawn sky. "We left because of fear. Maybe it's time to return because of hope." And so they stayed in Sondu. Weeks became months. Their daughter, Isiolo, was born on a rainy night named ironically after a faraway place, as if her parents' dreams of movement now lived in her name. The couple's life in Sondu was one of barely enough, roasting groundnuts to sell, George repairing punctured bicycle tires, Helen washing clothes for women at the market. They had not meant to stay this long, but something in Sondu's dusty roads, in its laughter on slow afternoons, in the way Isiolo's first words echoed against its tin roofs, it held them. And slowly, the ache of Kamuga softened. It was still home, but Sondu became their shelter. 2 years passed. George's hands were calloused. Helen's laugh carried fewer tremors now. They were not wealthy. They lived day by day, but they had survived. And dreams still flickered like a lantern flame. Small, fragile, but alive. One day, as the valley wind blew in from Kamuga, George stood on the ridge and looked back. He did not know it yet, but a messenger was coming from the village bearing news that would test their strength once more.